Okay guys, so tea and coffee painted today, so make sure you've got a glass of water. I've used a couple of teaspoons of coffee granules and then put a tiny amount of water in so that I get a slightly darker tone. Just a normal tea bag, again with a small amount of water just so that the colour of the tea is quite strong. You can use your watercolour palette for this. You might not want to, but to make some of the tones slightly darker, I think we're going to use a bit of the black. What I'd like you to do is make sure you have graphited one of the skulls up. Make sure you do it on the left hand side of your page, and then you've got the right hand side ready to just try out a tonal range with the tea and coffee. So I'm just going to start with the tea and just see what kind of tone. So it is going to be quite watery. So if you've got a surface that you can then mix your tea on with a little bit of the black from your palette, you'll then start to get some slightly darker tones. You can also as well, if any of you have fruit flavoured teas at home, you could use those. You'll get some, if you've got like a berry one, you'll get some nice red tones from that. If you've got a green tea or a peppermint tea, you could try and see what tones you get from that. So the coffee is slightly darker, and you will get some of the grains possibly in your tonal range, so just adding a little bit of texture to it, which is fine. Again, just adding a tiny bit of black, just to then start making my darker tones with my coffee granules. So it's important you do this just so that you can see what kind of range you can get from your tea and coffee. Does smell very nice as well. Always rinse your brush after you have checked your tonal range. So when I'm going on to the skull now, so it's up to you whether you use your tea or coffee, but I'm just going to put a really light wash over the whole of the skull, so I'm not going to be too careful about it. I'm just going to get a quick wash. Don't worry, mine's going to drip down because it's on a drawing board, but yours might be on a table. Might be at the end. We had a few drips and splashes onto it as well. So we've got a nice light tone over our skull. So this is why you need to have your reference image next to you, because then you can start looking at where the mid-tones and then the dark tones are. So on the right hand side of this skull, it's slightly darker. So I might mix a bit of tea and coffee together to get a slightly darker, and then I'm just going to start. So notice how I'm not taking too much time and care. I'm just trying to get that tone down. Got a few darker, slightly darker bits on the other side. Not too many. Need to try and show the shape of the skull because of the light tone on the side. It's giving that effect of the bump in the top of the skull. I'm going to make up a slightly darker tone now, again using a bit of my black. Again, test it on the side to see if that's about the right tone that you need to use. So I'm going to start putting in, so if I look at that, it's not dark enough, so I'm just going to put a little bit more of my black watercolour into it. some of it you might, so I'm kind of rushing through this a little bit, but you might want to let it dry in between stages. So now that I've got some light, I've got some mid, and I've got some slightly darker tones, I'm going to let it dry for a little bit at this stage, just so that I can then work back onto it. And then we have some crisp edges rather than it'll start bleeding into one another. Okay. Okay, so tonal skull part 2. I'm just using my tea and coffee that I had from yesterday, so I've left it overnight to dry. I've just left those in their pots to use because they still will be fine. Coffee might be slightly a bit more texture in the coffee, but again, that'll be fine. You can clean your water if you want to, or again, I'm just using mine from leftover yesterday. So I want some nice dark tones for the eye sockets. So I'm going to get those in and around the jaw, and then some detail. So I'm going to add quite a bit of black now. Let's get a nice dark tone. If I look at this eye, it's slightly darker on that part. So I don't want you to just do a flat colour with that. So certain parts, if I look really closely at that eye socket, certain parts are slightly darker than others. You'll see that there's lots of little lines, but obviously we're going to miss those out. If you try the extension task, you can then try to put those in as well. So I'm just going to go in, get all my dark tones down. So the nose is all quite dark apart from kind of a little bit in the middle. With some of the teeth off there. And if you've missed any of the mid-tones, so I can see I just need to make this slightly darker all on this side. I'm just going to work some of my water onto that dark tone to bring that round, blend that in. Some slightly darker tones again on this side. So I'm just going to use a little bit of that tone just to build that up. I'm not going to do too much more. Because if you keep working over your paper, it'll start to peel up, so you'll get some. You should also have a smaller brush in your pack, so you can use the smaller one just to get some little detail on the teeth. Some of them are slightly darker in areas, so just look really closely where that is. Just some areas where you can't get in with that slightly bigger brush. Might want to use your bigger brush just to add just some black, I would say, just to make those slightly darker bits really stand out now. Again, it'll blend in with your tea or coffee that you've decided to use and turn into a brown kind of sepia tone. So if I wanted to blend that in, so I've put the paint on there. If I just wet my brush, I've just got water on my brush, I can then blend that out to make that nice and smooth, so there's not doesn't go from dark tone into a mid-tone, there's like a gradual tone going on there as well. So I'm just going to do that the same with the other side. Just blend that out using water. If your brush does get too wet as well, you can use a bit of tissue or kitchen roll to then blend that. So I think if you then just look really closely, you'll be able to see some slightly darker tones in places, so you can then work back and add those in. But apart from that, that is your tonal school study with tea or coffee.